What's up guys? Today I wanted to show you how I created this space implosion effect that I made for a Valorant esports video. So strap on in and let's make some stars and nebulas implode. Alright, so let's just go through one by one. So these nebula objects basically are the volumes, like the volume objects that have the volume shaders. This was my go-to nebula shader that I used for all of them. I adjusted it like through all of them, right? Like they're all a little bit different. They all have like slightly different setup and maybe different procedural textures, different colors. They all use the same setup. Okay, center nova, that's pretty self-explanatory. That's just like the sphere in the center that keeps growing. So it's kind of like, yeah, the gravity point, the gravity center. Planet. Okay, this one is the planet object, right? So like the basic object I use to scatter planets around the universe. It's pretty simple shader actually, because I thought like they're moving so quick, we don't need to have like actual planet texture. So I just gave it some random color between some orange, blue, and white, and have it metallic, so it's nice and reflective, even though that's not realistic, but I think it worked well for the shot. Then the planet spawner, which is a huge sphere with a little bit distortion. I added this displacement because I wanted, if it was a clean sphere, right, like without the displacement, there would be a pretty clear cutoff when those planets would stop getting sucked in, right? I also did that for the stars, and if we add a displacement before the particle system, that just helps to offset the depth of the stars, right? So like some stars are like all the way out here, so even later on when all the stars getting pulled in, we still have a few stars kind of like coming in later. This is also like the star object. This is super straightforward. This is just a little bit random brightness into the emission. Yeah, it's just basically an emissive sphere with some random brightness. And then we got a bunch of star spawners. You can also see I've got a forces collection here. I thought about doing it a bit more complex force-wise, but I just settled on just having one pulling force in the center that pulls in all the particles. So yeah, I have these 3 different star spawners because I wanted to have a lot of stars in the beginning, right? So we can clearly see how they are around, like in space, and then starting to get pulled into the center. And then when we have that first wave of stars done, the second more further away stars get sucked in. And then I have a last one that's very far away. Oh, and I also have the big star spawner. I almost forgot about this one. I'm gonna also put this in stars. The big star spawner I added because I wanted range of stars sizes. And I couldn't really do that with the normal spawners because they only had like a scale and then a scale randomness. And I think how it works, the scale randomness is basically the higher you make it, right? So if scale randomness is 1, it means it can go all the way from 0 to that scale that you put in above, right? And if it's just 0.5, I think it only goes half down the scale. So I wanted only a few really big stars. So I needed to add a new spawner because I didn't have any kind of like curve or something. I just had this one random value, which wasn't enough for what I wanted. All right, cool. So that's the stars. Render view here again. And I'm going to show you the different nebulas that I made. Okay, so let's start with the cloth nebulas. These are the cloth nebulas. So they are cloth simulations. They get pulled into the center. And yeah, then they kind of like just stay like that. You can see they're just planes with subdivision on top, so they have a little bit more data to simulate with, and then another subdivision afterwards, so it gets smoothed out a little bit because I had the cloth simulation very unconstrained. You can see like most of the settings in the physical properties are at 0 because I wanted it to really feel bendy, right? Like a chewing gum. I didn't want it to stick together. I wanted it to feel like it's really like getting pulled apart. Look here at the shader. This is probably the most complicated shader though. So I basically did a little shader setup to give them these nebula looks, and they also all look a little bit random. So yeah, so we got this one here, and you can see if I duplicate this, it's got a completely different shape and color, right? If I duplicate again, it's again like completely different. That's because I used the random object info here, this random input. And random basically, like the object info node and the random output basically gives you a random number between 0 and 1 for each version of the object. So every object with that shader has a random value between 0 and 1. And I use this random value to control just a bunch of values. Mostly I use the W value for procedure textures. If you enable 4D dimensions, if you give it 4 dimensions, you get this W value. I also have a gradient here a spherical gradient in the center to kind of like make sure that they get cut off before the end of the shader. So yeah, I give it this gradient here is getting displaced by a noise texture. That way it still has kind of like a fall off to the outside, but it's not a clean fall off. That way, if I crunch it a little bit, the center is brightest and the outside is getting darker, but it's not perfect yet, right? So I added another gradient shader that's just like a clear gradient, and I mixed them together to make sure that yeah, just like on the outside of the texture that there's no more texture, so we don't get any like clean cutoff points. And then I just add a bunch of noise textures on top of each other. This one is a Voronoi texture. Voronoi is really good for for this kind of stuff. And by the way, what I did that's a bit different here is that I used the vector input. So I used one noise. If you put a color information into the vector input, it kind of displaces. Yeah, you can imagine it like a displacement. It displaces that texture. I guess also the color is controlled by the random information, right? So it can be one color between this yellow and this blue. And that's how we get the different colors in here. I think next I can show you the real volumetrics, not the fake plain nebulas. All right, let's disable them because they are a bit performance intensive. Nebula volumes. Let's go. Yeah, I have these animations where they just scale down exponentially. If you look at the graph here, they start off slowly getting smaller, but the cutoff point is pretty quick, so they're getting faster and faster and shrinking. Yeah, they just did a bunch of different styles for these, so it feels like we are going through different phases of the universe, basically. I think this one that we're seeing pretty obvious here right now is kind of cool, because this one is more like a wavy pattern, right? You can change all these values to get like vastly different results, right? Played around with these to like make them feel like they are from different phases of the universe. And I also made sure that I animate this W value when it gets closer to the center, because I wanted to give it a little bit of movement, because you can see when this W value changes, it feels like it's alive, right? Basically wanted to give it a little bit of chaos or distortion when it gets close to getting fully sucked in, right? Because I felt like if it didn't move at all, it would feel a bit stiff, a bit static. So yeah, I made this W value animate. Oh yeah, maybe I could show you something for the start here. So I wanted to have pretty defined kind of like nebulas here, right? Like I wanted to make sure that the beginning feels three-dimensional, like we are actually in a real nebula space thing. So yeah, I used this one to give it some very clear, almost like space mountains, right? Where you can clearly see the depth of the volume. We can go into Resolve now, and I can show you the compositing side of it. All right, so first of all, what I did, of course, is change the color space, right? Because everything that you get out of Blender that's in the EXR format is linear, and it looks like crap. We got the zoom blur happening here. It starts getting stronger actually at the end, right here, because I noticed that Eevee doesn't render volumes with motion blur. I think it only renders motion blur on volumes if the camera moves, but if the volume itself moves, it doesn't add motion blur. So I just added some zoom blur here that gets stronger over time. Okay, so I feed the video into the displacer and displace it with a noise, with an animated noise. And then I cut out the center, and then I color correct it. Then I add some zoom blur, and then I merge it on top. I wanted to give the center a little bit more power, right? I wanted it to feel more explosive. So that's what this does basically. You can see it with and without. Like without, it feels very sterile, a little unalive, a little dead. But with it, it feels much more aggressive, I think. Yeah, that's why I added it. Next up, we got the dent, which is mostly there for, I guess, for the ending too. Like it does a little bit throughout the whole thing. I guess the center, the start too, it feels like space is collapsing a little bit. I'm actually not super sure if I should have added that, because I feel like it removes a little bit of the detail that I had in the cloth simulation. The stand I added, I'm not sure if it was a good decision, but it gives us later down the line this interesting circle happening. It feels, yeah, I wanted to add this because I felt like it was a little bit repetitive over time, and I wanted to add something that feels like it's coming to a close, right? It's coming to like a high point. So I added this dent that kind of like reflects the outside inside, so it feels a little bit like a black hole. Yeah, that's why I did it. And then I have the shake here. The shake was interesting because I needed a shake that doesn't keeps or that passes on the transformation data. Yeah, this shake is basically just a transformation node that has a modifier on the center here. So if I go into modifiers, you can see I added a shake modifier, and it's shaking the center information. And I needed to do the shake effect this way because I am adding a lens flare here later on. And the lens flare, if I added the shake afterwards with the lens flare on top of it, I mean, it's actually not that bad. Like, I think it would have totally worked. Just in a different scenario, it would have been more. But yeah, I wasn't sure yet how much shake I want, so I wanted to make it right. But basically, if I have a lens flare and it's like moving through the image and it's got these refractions, right? It's got these reflections inside of the glass, right? So if you have the lens flare on the one corner and it moves, you have the reflections kind of like moving in the opposite directions of it, right? Like always being on the other side of the lens. And I wanted to have that here too, potentially. I didn't end up having it that much, but yeah, I just wanted to make sure it works. And that's why I used the transform to shake it here, because that way I could pass that center data off to the lens flare, right? Like you can see, I connected it, and then it comes in here, and then it moves together with that shake. Yeah, which would solve the problem of not being able to see the lens reflections moving with it. All right, and then next up, I've got my signature glow effect here. So you can see I pumped it up pretty hard, right? Like if you can see if it's disabled, enabled. So prism blur I added on top for some chromatic aberration, and then some radial blur to make the chromatic aberration a bit softer, and also focus a little bit more on the center. It's very soft, very slight effect. And then this color corrector at the end, I just added to make it work with the LUT that the guys were using. Yeah, okay, that's it for the Stamplosion. If you want to play around with the project yourself, you can get it from our Patreon. So yeah, just head on over there and get your project file. Bye bye, thanks for watching.